Before Audie Murphy became the face of American heroism, he was just another barefoot boy trying to survive the Texas dirt. Born on June 20th, 1925, in the tiny town of Kingston, Audie was the 7th of 12 children born to a sharecropping family already drowning in poverty. The Great Depression wasn't just a background for his early life, it was a storm he was thrown into from birth. His father, unable to handle the crushing weight of responsibility, walked out when Audie was still a child. His mother, overworked and undernourished, passed away when he was only 16. By then, Audie had dropped out of school with just a 5th grade education and a head full of burdens most grown men would buckle under. He took on farm labor, odd jobs, anything he could, to scrape together enough to keep his siblings from starving. That kind of upbringing doesn't build soft men. It builds steel. It builds a resolve that doesn't break under pressure. And for Audie Murphy, that resilience would carry him to the front lines of history and eventually into a story so dark, even the battlefield would pale in comparison. But first, he had to fight his way in. At 17, Audie Murphy wasn't anyone's idea of a war hero. He was 5'5", weighed barely 110 pounds, and looked more like a malnourished kid than a future legend. The Navy didn't want him. The Marines turned him away. But the U.S. Army, desperate in the thick of World War II, took a chance. That decision would change everything. Deployed to the battlefronts of North Africa, Italy, France, and Germany, Murphy wasn't just a soldier, he became a symbol of American grit. His courage was supernatural. In battle after battle, he proved that heroism had nothing to do with size and everything to do with heart. But it was in France in January 1945 where Audie earned a place in the history books forever. Near the village of Holtzwihr, he did the unthinkable. Alone, wounded, and vastly outnumbered, he climbed onto a burning tank destroyer and used its .50 caliber machine gun to hold off an entire company of German soldiers for over an hour. He called in artillery, returned fire, and refused to give ground. For that, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, but that was just one of many. By the end of the war, he had earned every U.S. military combat award for valor, including 2 Silver Stars, a Distinguished Service Cross, the Bronze Star, and 3 Purple Hearts. 33 decorations in total. No one matched him. But while the world saw a hero inside, something else was building, and it wasn't glory. When Audie Murphy came home from war, he wasn't the same boy who had left Texas. He returned a national hero, celebrated in parades, courted by Hollywood, and praised by presidents. But behind that uniform, behind the medals and fanfare, was a man trapped in a war that never ended. Long before PTSD had a name, Audie was suffering from its every symptom. Nightmares, anxiety, insomnia. He slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow every night. The war had left scars no metal could cover. But in a time when mental health was taboo, especially for veterans, Murphy did something unthinkable. He spoke out publicly. He used his platform to demand better treatment and understanding for returning soldiers. He wasn't just a war hero, he became one of the first public figures to shed light on the silent suffering of veterans. Still, while the world praised his bravery, Murphy was quietly crumbling. The spotlight that once glorified him started to feel like a trap, and the deeper he went into the world of fame, the further he drifted from peace. And yet, even that wasn't the whole story, because Murphy's post-war battles weren't just internal. They were about to take a very real, very dangerous turn. After the battlefield, Hollywood should have been a haven. But for Audie Murphy, it was just another war zone, one with different enemies, silent betrayals, and a new kind of pressure. He became a movie star almost overnight, headlining over 40 films. The most iconic, To Hell and Back, a chilling retelling of his real-life war story, in which he played himself. It was a hit, not just because of his name, but because the raw emotion wasn't acting. He was reliving the hell he had just barely escaped. He made westerns, thrillers, even wrote country songs recorded by stars like Dean Martin. He worked with legends like James Stewart and Thelma Ritter, held his own in gritty productions, and even stepped behind the camera. Audie Murphy was a rising force in Hollywood, but fame came with a price. Underneath the fame, the trauma was still festering. Murphy gambled. He took sleeping pills. He distanced himself from colleagues. Those who knew him well said there were days he'd vanish without warning, only to reappear like nothing had happened. Some called it eccentric, others saw it for what it was, a war hero unraveling under the weight of survival. And yet, there was something else, something unspoken. As his fame grew, so did his connections, and not all of them were friendly. Murphy had a reputation for honesty, patriotism, and boldness. But behind the scenes, he was developing relationships with intelligence figures, former military contractors, and Cold War insiders. He lent his image to Army recruitment films and traveled the globe on military-sponsored programs. But these weren't just goodwill tours. Murphy was reportedly given access to classified tech, secret briefings, and off-the-record intelligence gatherings. Some began to whisper, was Murphy more than just a face? Was he being groomed as a public liaison between between the military and Hollywood? Or worse, was he poking into places he wasn't supposed to? One longtime associate later claimed Murphy had stumbled upon a covert operation connected to Cold War espionage and domestic surveillance. At first, it sounded like nonsense, paranoia maybe. But the more Murphy talked about government overreach, the more doors closed around him. He began receiving anonymous threats. He believed he was being followed. Friends say he became obsessed with privacy, refusing to use the same phone twice, avoiding public gatherings, even accusing acquaintances of spying on him. Was it delusion? Or had the man who once stood unshaken on a burning tank now found himself on the wrong side of another war? And this time, there was no battlefield, no medals, just silence. May 28, 1971, Audie Murphy boarded a private plane headed for Virginia. It was supposed to be a simple business trip, routine, uneventful, but just hours later, the plane vanished into the mountains of Catawba, crashing into the side of Brush Mountain in bad weather. The official story was simple: low visibility, pilot error, tragic accident. At just 45 years old, America's most decorated soldier was gone. But something didn't sit right. For years, discrepancies surrounded the crash. The flight path didn't make sense. The pilot had over 8,000 hours of flight time, yet made rookie mistakes. Witnesses reported seeing the plane flying dangerously low, as if it had been forced down. Crucial wreckage components were either missing or tampered with, and then there were the files. Key documents related to the crash were sealed for decades. No investigation was ever reopened. Murphy's name was brushed under the rug. Friends and family begged for answers, but doors stayed shut. And when independent investigators tried to piece things together, they discovered something chilling. The crash may not have been an accident at all. Wires severed, instruments manipulated, and witnesses, previously silent, now speaking out. One whistleblower even claimed Murphy had been under surveillance in the months leading up to the crash. Why? Because he knew something he wasn't supposed to, and what happened next would only deepen the darkness. For over 50 years, the official narrative held firm. Audie Murphy died in an accident. End of story. But in a shocking turn of events, a former intelligence contractor, now in his 80s, broke decades of silence with a chilling confession. He claimed Murphy had come into possession of highly sensitive information relating to illegal domestic surveillance operations during the Cold War. According to this source, Murphy's involvement with military briefings had gone deeper than public relations. He had access to restricted intelligence logs. One such log reportedly mentioned an operation targeting American citizens, journalists, even veterans, suspected of communist ties without due process. Murphy was disgusted. He believed in service, in honor, but not in spying on his own countrymen. He'd begun asking questions, documenting what he'd seen. And worst of all, he reportedly planned to go public. He'd contacted a journalist friend in Los Angeles just days before his fatal flight, arranging a private meeting. The whistleblower alleges that once Murphy's intentions became known, higher-ups acted swiftly. The plane crash, he said, wasn't just convenient, it was orchestrated. Could it really be true? Was America's most decorated soldier silenced to protect government secrets? If this were a movie script, it might seem too far-fetched. But this was real life, and the most damning evidence was still to come. In 2023, a group of independent crash investigators, funded by a private historical foundation, gained access to the remaining wreckage of Murphy's plane, long buried in a storage hangar in Virginia. What they discovered was beyond unsettling. Critical components, such as control wires and hydraulic lines, showed signs of deliberate tampering. Some wires had clean, surgical-style cuts, inconsistent with crash damage. Even more suspicious, the aircraft's altimeter and navigation systems were both reportedly disabled. Again, not by impact, but before takeoff. The group published their findings in a 147-page report, which quickly made waves in aviation forums and conspiracy circles alike. Experts began to weigh in. One retired FAA investigator called the damage pattern highly irregular. Another pilot with decades of experience said, "It's like someone wanted that plane to fail, but made it look like weather was the cause." But here's the most disturbing part. When the group tried to submit their findings to the National Transportation Safety Board for formal review, they were denied. No investigation, no hearing, just silence. Why? What was so dangerous about reopening a 50-year-old case? Unless someone still had something to hide. Despite the cover-ups, the silence, and the half-truths, Audie Murphy's story didn't vanish. In fact, the attempts to suppress it only fueled deeper investigation from independent researchers, military historians, and a growing online movement of veterans who saw something disturbingly familiar in his tale. Murphy wasn't just a war hero turned movie star. He was a man trying to reconcile duty with truth, someone who carried his trauma not as a weakness, but as a warning. He saw how America treated its veterans. He saw how the system chewed them up and discarded them. And he tried, quietly but courageously, to speak out. Those close to him now believe his death wasn't just tragic, it was targeted. A silencing wrapped in the clean disguise of a plane crash. A cautionary tale for any soldier who tried to become a whistleblower, but his legend refused to stay buried. In 2013, a documentary crew attempted to reopen the case. Though the project was halted under mysterious legal pressure, some of the footage leaked, and what it suggested was shocking. A trail of lost files, confidential payouts, and surveillance records tracking Murphy's movements in the final weeks of his life. And most damning of all, a never-before-seen letter, allegedly written by Murphy, where he warned, "If I go down, it won't be an accident. I have enemies I can't name." What secrets did Audie Murphy take to his grave? And what happens when America's most decorated soldier becomes too dangerous for the very country he served? To fully understand the forces Audie Murphy may have been up against, we have to step into the Cold War backdrop of the 1960s. This wasn't just a time of geopolitical tension. It was an era of surveillance, covert operations, and increasing distrust between government institutions and their own citizens. Murphy, unknowingly or not, was in the center of it. During the late 1950s and early 60s, Murphy had developed relationships with military officials and politicians. These weren't casual meet and greets. These were meetings in D.C., closed-door briefings, and Pentagon handshakes. At one point, he was even tapped for a public information campaign related to American counterintelligence efforts. Why? Because he was the perfect face, a war hero, an actor, and someone the public trusted implicitly. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Murphy wasn't just playing along, he was asking questions. Sources have revealed he grew increasingly suspicious of how veterans were being treated and how certain classified programs operated behind the scenes. He spoke with other veterans who claimed they were being monitored or manipulated after service. And then there's the most disturbing connection. Reports have surfaced that Murphy had access to information related to Operation Paperclip, an infamous program where former Nazi scientists were brought to the US for military research. If Murphy knew too much, and if he started asking the wrong questions, would that be enough to mark him for silence? The day Murphy died, he boarded a twin-engine Aero Commander, a plane that, by all accounts, should never have left the ground. The pilot, Herman Butler, was known to be confident, maybe too confident. Weather reports indicated low visibility and storm warnings in the mountainous region near Catawba, Virginia. Still, the flight took off. But according to a later investigation, the plane was not just flying blind. It may have been mechanically compromised before ever leaving the tarmac. Records revealed that the aircraft had recently undergone maintenance. At a private airfield with no official documentation filed, the technician who supposedly signed off on the repairs, he'd left the company 6 months prior. His name was forged. Even more chilling, 2 days before the crash, an anonymous phone call was placed to the Federal Aviation Administration. Warning of an intentional aviation risk involving a public figure. That call was never followed up. Why was that ignored? Why did no one halt the flight? Some now believe the sabotage began well before takeoff, with a plan not to get Murphy to his destination, but to make sure he never arrived. The final days of Audie Murphy's life were filled with eerie details. He'd become withdrawn, reportedly avoiding press, turning down film offers, and speaking cryptically to friends about getting things in order. One associate even claimed Murphy said, "If something happens to me, don't believe the first story they tell you." He was making preparations, legally and personally. He amended his will. He made private calls to several fellow veterans, and he reached out to a former intelligence contact, asking to meet in person urgently. That meeting never happened. Days later, Murphy was gone. It's what investigators found in his briefcase that raised the most eyebrows. Recovered from the crash site, battered but intact, was a locked satchel containing government documents, a cassette tape, and a notebook filled with handwritten entries. None of that material was ever released to the public. In fact, those contents were quietly turned over to federal agents and never seen again. Murphy's family never got answers. The military offered no clarification, and the FBI denied all involvement. But here's what we do know. Murphy had been digging into something that made powerful people uncomfortable, and when he got too close, that trail went cold, fast. Whether you believe he was silenced or simply a casualty of tragic coincidence, one fact remains. Audie Murphy lived his life as a warrior, and may have died trying to protect something even greater than himself. For decades, anyone who questioned the official story of Audie Murphy's death was labeled a conspiracy theorist. The media stuck to the pilot error narrative, and government agencies had long since closed the case. But in 2023, everything changed. A whistleblower, a former intelligence operative now in his 80s, came forward in a private interview with an independent investigative journalist. What he revealed wasn't just chilling, it turned the entire story upside down. According to the whistleblower, Murphy had stumbled onto a classified weapons program during a visit to a military testing facility in New Mexico, a visit arranged as part of his work on a U.S. Army documentary series. What was supposed to be a PR opportunity became something far darker. Murphy, inquisitive as always, started asking questions. Too many questions. What he uncovered, allegedly, were early prototypes for biological weapons being tested on American soil, technologies that had not yet been disclosed to the public or even acknowledged by Congress. And he didn't stay quiet. He made notes. He told close confidants. He reportedly recorded conversations. According to the whistleblower, Murphy was a patriot, but he wasn't naive. He knew when something smelled wrong, and once he started pulling on that thread, someone decided it was time to cut the string entirely. In the years that followed the crash, the pieces never quite added up, but no one had enough leverage or information to put the full puzzle together. Now, thanks to declassified documents, witness accounts, and modern forensic tools, the picture is becoming terrifyingly clear. Flight logs from that day were altered. The official weather report was tampered with, showing clearer conditions than what other aircraft in the area reported. And perhaps most damning, the voice recorder from the cockpit was mysteriously missing, despite the aircraft model being equipped with one. Investigators also discovered a disturbing detail. Murphy had made 3 phone calls just 48 hours before his death. All 3 were placed to private numbers linked to former military contractors. None of those individuals ever acknowledged the calls, and 2 of them died under suspicious circumstances in the following 5 years. Coincidence? Even. Murphy's autopsy raised red flags. Conducted quickly and quietly, it was never released in full to the public. Family members who requested the report were told it had been misplaced during record transfers, and when independent researchers tried to access military records about Murphy's final documentary project, they hit a wall. Pages had been blacked out. Others were marked classified until 2050. What were they trying to hide? Audie Murphy was the embodiment of courage. He wasn't just a war hero. He was the man who ran toward danger while others ran away. He survived the horrors of World War II, faced down personal demons, and turned his pain into purpose, speaking out for veterans and pushing for change when it was anything but popular. But in the end, it wasn't a battlefield that claimed him. It may have been something darker, something calculated. For decades, we were told his death was a tragic accident, a fluke of bad weather and poor luck. But now, with new evidence, insider testimony, and declassified documents, that explanation no longer holds. Too much was hidden, too many pieces were erased, and too many questions still echo unanswered. If the most decorated American soldier of World War II, someone who had given everything for his country, could be silenced without justice, then what does that say about the system that was supposed to protect him? Murphy's legacy is not just one of valor, it's one of sacrifice beyond the battlefield. He may have uncovered truths that threatened powerful interests, and he may have paid for it with his life, but the story doesn't end. With a crash on Brush Mountain, it ends with all of us asking harder questions, refusing easy answers, and keeping the memory of Audie Murphy alive not just as a war hero, but as a truth seeker who wouldn't stay silent. The mystery is no longer buried. The truth, however, disturbing, is finally out. And now, we have a choice. Let the silence continue, or demand the justice that Audie Murphy never received. If this story shook you like it did us, don't let it fade into silence. Hit that like button to honor Audie Murphy's legacy. Subscribe for more untold truths and hidden histories they never wanted you to hear. And drop a comment below. Do you believe his death was really just an accident, or something far more sinister? The truth is out there. Let's uncover it together.